The senator from Washington.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank the chair of the Veterans Committee for putting together this very good piece of legislation we are about to consider. Madam President, it is no secret that here in our nation's capital, we are sharply divided on any number of economic and political issues that are facing average Americans right now. But I have come to the floor today to talk about one issue we are rarely divided on, and that is our duty to keep the promise that we have made to provide not only care, but opportunity to all those who've honorably served in the nation's armed forces. It unites even the most unlikely partners because we all realize that we've all made a promise to those who have signed up to serve, and we all need to keep it because there is so much on the line. When our brave men and women volunteered to protect our nation, we promised them that we would take care of them and their families when they return home. We need to ask ourselves, are we doing enough for our nation's veterans? So, Madam President, this comprehensive legislation before us today really is the test for a lot of members of Congress. Can we put politics aside now for the good of our nation's veterans? Can we show these heroes, despite our differences, we will work as diligently towards getting them the benefits and care they've earned as they have worked for our nation? I hope we can. And I say that because the investments in this bill are a lot more than numbers on a page. They are life-changing programs for veterans who are looking to take the skills that they've learned from the battlefield to the boardroom. It's support for the countless victims of military sexual assault who are desperate to come out of the shadows. It's providing the dream of having a family to those who are suffering from some of the most devastating wounds of war. It's timely investments in the very biggest priorities of our nation's heroes. So, Madam President, I'd like to use the remainder of my time to highlight just a few of the investments that are included in this bill and how they translate into the lives of our veterans and their families. For those who have worn our nation's uniform, particularly for those young veterans who spent the last decade being shuttled back and forth to war zones half a world away, the road home isn't always smooth, and the red tape is often long. And the transition from battlefield to the workplace is never easy. Madam President, this should not be the case. We shouldn't let the skills and training our nation's veterans have already attained go to waste. We can't afford to have our nation's heroes unable to find a job to support their families without an income that provides the stability or without work that provides the pride and sense of purpose that is so critical to the transition home. And that's why I'm proud that in this legislation we're considering today, we reauthorize and build on many of the provisions that were part of my Vow to Hire Heroes Act, which was signed into law by President Obama in 2011. Double-digit unemployment rates for veterans used to be the norm. But since VOW became law, the unemployment rate for post-9/11 veterans is now on par with non-veterans. And while recent data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics prove that these programs work, we still have more work to be done, and that's addressed in this legislation. Madam President, I also believe that the great strength of our military is in the character and dedication of our men and women who wear the uniform. It is the courage of these Americans to volunteer to serve that is the Pentagon's greatest asset. Our service members volunteer to face danger, to put their lives on the line, to protect our country and our people. It's no longer a secret that sexual assault continues to plague the ranks of our military services, which is another issue that this comprehensive legislation addresses. I think we all agree it's absolutely unconscionable that a fellow service member, the person that you rely on to have your back and be there for you, would commit such a terrible crime. And even worse is the prevalence of these crimes. It is appalling that they commit such a personal violation of their brother or sister in uniform. Madam President, the National Defense Authorization Act that we passed last year took some historic action to help service members access the resources they need to seek justice without fear, including a provision that I authored to create a new category of legal advocates called Special Victims Counsels, who would be responsible for advocating on behalf of the interests of the victim. But we still have a long road ahead of us before we put an end to these shameful acts, and meanwhile provide all the necessary resources to those who have unfortunately been impacted. Thankfully, the chairman's legislation aims to do just that, with provisions to improve the delivery of care and benefits to veterans who experience sexual trauma while serving in the military. When our best and brightest put on a uniform and join the United States Armed Forces, they do so with the understanding that they will sacrifice much in the name of defending our country and its people. But that sacrifice should not have to come in the form of unwanted sexual contact from within the ranks. Finally, Madam President, I want to talk today about a provision that has been one of my top priorities in the Senate for a while now. It is a provision that builds upon our effort to improve VA services for women veterans and veterans with families. As we all know, with the changing nature of our conflicts overseas, we have been seeing the brutal impact of improved explosive devices, or IEDs, which means we are now seeing more and more service members, both male and female, increasingly susceptible to reproductive, spinal, and traumatic brain injuries due to the weapons of war. Now, thanks to modern medicine, many of these service members are being kept alive and they're returning home. And like so many of our veterans, these men and women come home looking to return to their lives, to find employment, and often to start a family. Yet, what they find when they go to the VA today is that the fertility services that are available don't meet their very complex needs. In fact, Madam President, veterans suffering from these injuries find the VA is today specifically barred from providing more advanced assisted reproduction techniques like IVF. They are told that despite the fact that they have made such an extreme sacrifice for our country, we cannot today provide them with the medical services they need to start a family. These are veterans like Staff Sergeant Kyle and his wife, Tracy. Staff Sergeant Kyle was shot in the neck while on patrol in Iraq in 2007, 6 weeks after he married the love of his life, Tracy. The bullet went through the right side of his neck, it hit a major artery, it went through his spinal cord, and it exited through his shoulder blade. Staff Sergeant Kyle instantly became a quadriplegic. Doctors told Tracy, his wife, that her husband would be on a ventilator for the rest of his life and would never move his arms or his legs. Well, Staff Sergeant Kyle eventually defied the odds and found himself off that ventilator and beginning the long journey of physical rehabilitation. In fact, Tracy and her husband started talking and exploring the possibilities of having a family together. Having children was all they could talk about once they started to adjust to their new normal. So with Staff Sergeant Kyle's injuries preventing him from having children naturally, Tracy turned to the VA and began to explore her options for fertility treatments. But because of that VA ban, she was turned down. So Tracy and Staff Sergeant Kyle decided instead to pursue IVF through the private sector. Out of options, they decided that this was important enough to them that they were willing to pay out of pocket to the tune of almost $32,000 per round of treatment. Well, thankfully, on November 9th, 2010, just after their first round of IVF, Staff Sergeant Kyle and Tracy welcomed their twins, Matthew and Faith, into the world. Tracy told me, and I want to quote her, she said, "The day we had our children, something changed in both of us. This is exactly what we'd always wanted. Our dreams had arrived. The VA, Congress, and the American people have said countless times to us that they want to do everything they can to support my husband and make him feel whole again. This is your chance. Having a family is exactly what we needed to feel whole again. Please help us make these changes to the law so that other families can share this experience," unquote. Well, Madam President, Tracy and Matt aren't alone. There are many men and women out there who share this common thread of a desperate desire to fulfill their dream of starting a family, only to find the catastrophic wounds they sustained while defending our country are now preventing them from seeing that dream through. As we all know, it should not be that way. Our nation's heroes should not have to spend tens of thousands of dollars in the private sector to get the advanced reproductive treatment they need to start a family. They shouldn't have to watch their marriages dissolve because of the stress of infertility in combination with the stresses of readjusting to a new life after severe injuries, driving relationships to a breaking point. Any service member who sustains this type of serious injury deserves a lot more. And Madam President, we came very close to making this bill reality last Congress. In fact, with Tracy Kyle sitting up in the gallery, like so many of our heroes who have joined us today, with Tracy watching, the Senate unanimously passed this legislation. Unfortunately, what happened was some Republicans in the House of Representatives refused to take this bill up and pass it. So time ran out last year, and we were not able to get it to the President's desk. But Madam President, this effort is not over. This provision was the very first piece of legislation I introduced in this Congress, and there's excellent momentum to get it done. This is about giving our veterans who sacrificed everything, every option we have to help them fulfill the simple dream of having a family. It says we are not turning our back on the catastrophic reproductive wounds that have become a signature of these wars. It says to all those brave men and women that didn't ask questions when they were put in harm's way, that we won't let politics get in the way of our commitment to you. This provision in this bill will reverse this troubling barrier to care and will bring the VA in line, finally, with the military, which does provide these services under TRICARE. Madam President, our women veterans deserve this, our male veterans deserve this, and our military families deserve this. So, Madam President, I'm here today to urge my colleagues to support this bill, the Comprehensive Veterans Health and Benefits and Military Retirement Pay Restoration Act of 2014. Our veterans don't ask for a lot. They shouldn't have to. They've done everything that has been asked of them. They've been separated from their families through repeat deployments. They have sacrificed life and limb in combat. They have done all this selflessly and with honor to our country. We can't allow our commitment to them to lapse or to get caught up in any kind of unrelated amendments or political grandstanding. So I want to thank the senator from Vermont and his staff for their tireless work in putting this in the legislation and bringing this to the floor. And I hope we do the right thing now, get this passed, and get this legislation to the desk of the President. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Madam President.